Welcome to another episode of Historic Marker Monday. I am Michelle with Fun in Key West, and I'm so glad that you stopped by for today's episode. We're going to wrap up a lot of what we've been talking about today about Key West and the cigar industry. So, at some point in time, I'm not sure if you knew this or not, but did you know that Key West, this little teeny tiny island, was the cigar capital of the world? Yep, and we're going to dive into a lot of that. And picture this. It's the late 1800s. You have 150, 200 cigar factories, and millions of cigars are being hand rolled in Key West. And so they're being shipped off all over the place. And as you're walking around Key West, I always talk about this, but I want you to pay attention to a lot of those historic markers. And today's historic marker is over on Green Street, and it's 540 Green Street. And you probably stood in front of this place 100 times and didn't realize the full impact of what this place was or what it had. So if you're standing there at 540 Green Street, you are standing in front of the former site of one of the biggest factories. And we're going to talk about that too. So the cigar industry in Key West started all with William Wall. And you're going to go, who? He was the leader of the cigar industry in Key West. And when you go to Mallory Square and you come out and there's that big warehouse building, that's the Wall Warehouse. And that's where a lot of the magic started, if you want to look at it from that perspective. He started the first cigar factory in 1831. Because demand for cigars was booming all around the world around the late 19th century here. And Key West offered the perfect climate to be part of the cigar industry. You have the port, you have the connection to Cuba, and it was just a natural spot for cigar manufacturing. And remember, to keep this all in context, this was all before Miami even existed. Miami didn't become incorporated until, I think, 1896. So this was long before Miami. But how did Cuba get involved in all of this? So if you go back and remember your history, and I had to look some of this up, so I may be not 100% accurate, but it's been a long time since I did world history. But Cuba was one of Spain's territories or colony, and Spain referred to Cuba as its pearl of its colonies. But this grip that Spain had on Cuba was beginning to weaken around the 1800s. Spain had been in 7 wars and these costly expeditions of exploring the world, and it took a toll on Spain's financial well-being. So Spain's government took Cuban tobacco and sold it out on the open market to help fund its wars and its explorations and its expeditions. But it also, in their thought process and in their theory, they thought, well, this is going to squash any revolutionary ideas that the Cubans may have because we're taking away one of their largest exports. But thousands of Cubans fled to Key West during this time to escape this oppression. And a lot of these people were skilled cigar rollers or torcedores. And the other way that Spain started to impose its will on Cuba is there were high tariffs that were imposed on cigars exported from Cuba to the U.S., making cigars made in Cuba coming to the U.S. very, very, very pricey. So a perfect storm was then created where Key West became the best place, the perfect place, the ideal place to roll cigars with Cuban tobacco and Cuban expertise, but at a fraction of the price of Cuban cigars. So what was the result? The cigar industry exploded in Key West. By the 1890s, Key West was producing over 100 million hand-rolled cigars every year. There were 150, 200 factories operating, and you had over 2,000 cigar rollers working full time. A single skilled roller could hand roll. We're not talking factory machine. We're talking hand roll 300 cigars a day. Or just that one person was rolling 100,000 cigars a year. This became a booming industry for Key West, and what it ended up doing was making Key West one of the wealthiest and largest cities in Florida, even more so than Tampa or Jacksonville. And factories ranged from the enormous block-sized brick buildings to small wooden structures. And these small wooden structures were called buckeyes because there was this terminology that if you used Cuban tobacco and manufactured it in a small factory in the United States, it became a buckeye. Life in the factories, and we've seen this. If you go back and look at the Gatto factory in Gattoville and all of those areas within Key West, you had these compounds that were created by the cigar factories. You had the cigar factory, you had the owners' homes, you had the factory workers' homes, and they created neighborhoods and villages, if you want to look at it from that perspective, around the factory. In Gattoville, they were encouraged to be entrepreneurial. So there were all kinds of stores that popped up. You had your neighborhood store, you had the people who took care of everything, and they became entrepreneurial. So you had the people who worked in the factory. And then if you think about it, you needed to have all of those people that work and live in a community to help support the community. You had your grocery stores, you had to have your produce, your restaurants, your coffee shops, all of that. But what I found interesting was to entertain these cigar rollers and the factory workers, you had people in these cigar factories called lectors. And it was a person who was paid to read the newspapers, political speeches, and literature while the rollers worked. So it was the way to entertain them, to keep their mind occupied. And this is how so often the cigar workers learned the news of the world, and it, in essence, helped fuel that revolutionary ideas of the Cuban exile community. And so the factories became hubs of political activism, art, music, and Cuban culture. And Key West Cuban culture grew rapidly because of all of this. You see it still today, the influencing of local food, music, and even architecture. Now, if you come to Key West today, there isn't a whole lot of cigar manufacturing happening. And there were several things that led to that downturn. One of the largest cigar operations was the Seidenberg factory. And it's still there today, and you can see it. It's on the historic marker tour. And that's the one we're talking about today. It's over on 540 Green Street. And the factory complex took up nearly an entire city block. But in 1886, a catastrophic fire, referenced that we've talked about before, the historic fire of 1886, destroyed most of we're going to say 10 major factories on Green Street. Now, there is some conspiracy theories about the fire, that it was not accidental, that it was intentionally set, because there are reports that the fire actually was put out, and then rekindled upwind, not downwind, but upwind, to make sure that all of the cigar factories were destroyed. Now, after the fire, there was some rebuilding. And despite all the efforts of the cigar manufacturers to rebuild, the industry just literally began to fade into the early 20th century. You had the fire, you had hurricanes that battled the island, you had transportation issues. Key West at this time, remember, is still an island. You have transportation issues. Even though it's easy because of the port to get tobacco into Key West, it's much harder to get that finished product, the cigars, out of Key West. But transportation became improved elsewhere. So think Tampa, specifically Ybor City, and they became much more accessible. In Tampa, then began to attract all of these cigar makers with better rail connections and larger factories and enticing them as into a better way of life. Today, the cigar industry still has an impact on Key West. And you can see, even though it's declined, that the legacy of the cigar industry is still in Key West. Many of the factory buildings still stand, though they've been repurposed for other things. The William Wall warehouse is now houses a restaurant, and you can wander around through there and see the art from the cigar industry and the Cuban influences. You're also going to see the Cuban influences in Key West. The culture is it's still alive in Key West. You see it in the food, you hear it in the music, and you see it in the celebrations that Key West participates in. You can still find hand-rolled cigars in Key West in local shops. It's still often made in the traditional way. If you head over to Fitzpatrick Street, you can check out Rodriguez Cigars. We've walked in there, and Rodriguez's grandmother is hand rolling cigars just the way that they used to roll them. And that is a very friendly, family owned establishment. You can walk in. If you're new to cigars, they will walk you through on how to choose your best and help you maybe do a variety so that you can figure that out. But they'll give you a lot of information so that you feel like you were given not only a history lesson about cigars, but you understand the choices and how to store them and which best ones to have. There's a couple places on Duval, Old Havana, and Island Cigars as well, but you can still find these hand-rolled cigars there. There are cigar lounges, obviously, that you can go pop in. There's hosted events. Sometimes there's cigar demonstrations being done. But I want you to take in, as you walk through Key West and you see these historic markers, that harken back to the cigar industry. There's still all of that influence and legacy that you're going to see. So for some final thoughts and some fun facts for you. Key West once produced more cigars than anywhere else in the world. Most visitors don't realize, like we talked about, that Key West was at one time the cigar capital of the world. It brought wealth, Cuban culture, and all these global connections to this tiny island. And imagine you're back in the 1800s, and imagine you're standing there on Green Street, and it's the early 1890s, and the air's filled with the scent of fresh tobacco, and you've got the sound of foreign languages all being talked around you, and the cigars being hand rolled, and the music. That would be a fun time to go explore Key West, I think. Thank you so much for joining me today. We did not a real deep dive, but we went into the cigar industry of Key West because as you walk through, and if you're not familiar with it, you're not going to realize how impactful that cigar industry was on Key West. Be sure to head over to FunInKeyWest.com. Under things to do, there is the historic marker walking tour. It is free. It is self-guided. Just go in and check those out. You can also do it as you're wandering through Key West and you see all of these amazing little markers. Stop and read them. I'm telling you, the stories about the people and the events will really give you a better idea and probably a true appreciation and an enduring and deeper love for Key West as you start to learn its history and its people and everything that makes Key West Key West. I'm going to encourage you to head over to FunInKeyWest.com to not only check out things to do, you can book your tours, everything over there. We work with amazing tour operators, but you can sign up for our book club and grab our free happy hour list. I am Michele with FunInKeyWest. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let me know, have you experienced a hand-rolled cigar in Key West? What was your favorite? Not that I may know the difference, but I want to know. Maybe other people want to know. Put it down in the comments. Let me know. DM me, and we'll share it out there. You guys have a great one. Talk to you later. Bye.